Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Jeff. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, life coach, and I'm practically sane. Practically. Let's talk about OCD. The reason I wanted to talk about OCD is because recently I listened to a podcast, one of my favorite podcasts called the Armchair Expert Podcast with Dax Shepard. He interviewed Olympic gold medalist Allie Raceman, and she was there to talk about her anxiety, experiences with abuse. I don't want to go into too much detail because it's her story to tell, and I highly recommend that you listen to the podcast if you haven't. It's a great podcast. Dax Shepard is a cool guy and also just fun to listen to. It's actually entertaining, but he also just really works on himself. One of the things that they talked about was OCD. OCD is one of the most misunderstood anxiety disorders out there. Basically, people think that OCD looks a very specific way, a way that they've been shown on TV, movies, things like that. Usually it's depicted as the person who really worries about their hands being dirty and washes their hands a whole bunch, or is super paranoid and locks the doors a bunch of times. That definitely can be OCD. OCD can certainly look like that. However, there's lots of other manifestations of OCD that people are not familiar with. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit in this video. Regardless of what kind of OCD a person has, it all follows the same basic pattern. There is an obsession, which is the O in OCD, and there's a compulsion, which is the C in OCD. The obsession is an intrusive thought or an unwanted thought or a very intensely anxious thought that the person doesn't want, wants to get rid of. And so the compulsion is then used to help get rid of or soothe the person's anxiety as a result of that obsession. So let's take the most classic example. A person worries that their hands are dirty, contaminated, and so what they do is wash their hands a bunch of times. Some people may have rituals that they then create where they wash their hands a certain number of times or a certain way or with a certain kind of soap or very specifically so that they know that they've washed their hands correctly, and it eases their anxiety temporarily. Obsessive thoughts are miserable, and so they're generally accompanied by a compulsion used to calm them down. And the compulsion can be a whole host of different things that the person's brain has conjured up as a way to feel better. Sometimes it's very related to the obsession. So example is dirty hands, wash your hands. Sometimes it's completely unrelated. So someone may have an intrusive thought that something bad is going to happen to their family or something bad is going to happen to them. And their way of keeping control of that obsession is to tap every corner when they walk by it, or they count to 20, or nod their head a certain way and count to 20. There's lots of things that they can do to gain a sense of control, sometimes that have nothing to do with the actual obsession. Now, where it sometimes gets tricky is when the obsession and the compulsion are both mental. Obsessional OCD is called pure O because it doesn't look like there's a compulsion, but there is. It's a mental compulsion. It can look like this. Obsession. Maybe I'm going to hurt somebody. I'm going to lose control and I'm going to stab somebody. Or I am worried that I ran over somebody with my car and I just didn't notice. Those are some common ones. That will then be met by a mental compulsion where you then rehearse the event in your mind. You try and reassure yourself. You try and talk yourself down. You try and think of all the other possibilities. You basically engage in more ruminating thoughts to try and soothe the original intrusive thought. And so when that happens, it looks like it's all mental. It doesn't look like there's a behavioral compulsion, but there is. It's a mental compulsion. And those can be some of the hardest to stop because they're mental. They're not physical. It's not something you can actually stop doing easily. For example, washing your hands, we can tell somebody, don't wash your hands for 3 days and just sit with the obsession of having dirty hands. And that type of exposure will generally cause them to start to feel less controlled by that obsession. With mental compulsions, it's really hard because how do you stop a mental compulsion? It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of mindfulness. Meditation can really help. But it is hard to do because it's just right there. It's so easy to just cross that line into a mental compulsion, and then you're in the cycle again. The cycle of OCD looks like this. There's an obsession. The compulsion then soothes the obsession temporarily, and then the obsession comes back. And when the obsession comes back, your brain remembers that last time I had this obsession, All I did was wash my hands 3 times and it made it feel better. So that's what I need to do again. So it's a self-reinforcing cycle. You have this intrusive thought, you find a temporary solution, and that's good enough for your brain because you don't want to feel that way. You don't want that intrusive thought anymore. You don't want that obsession anymore. And so you will deal with a temporary relief. Unfortunately, it's self-reinforcing because that temporary relief is temporary and the obsession will come back. So that's really the basics. That's the foundation of what OCD is all about. OCD is complicated. It manifests itself a lot of different ways. The treatment for it is fairly straightforward, but it's difficult. Sometimes people need medication, and that is okay. There is no shame about seeing a psychiatrist and talking to them about potential medication. Do not be ashamed of that. Your mental health is the most important thing in the world. If you have other questions, feel free to email me. I'll try to get to them all. If there's anything else that you want to hear me talk about, I'm hoping to talk about all kinds of mental health issues and communication issues, and probably going to try and stay away from politics as much as I possibly can. But every time something's relevant to mental health, I may bring it up. So if there's anything that you want me to talk about, please shoot me an email. Visit me at practicallysane.org. I am available for life coaching sessions. Keep in mind, however, life coaching is not therapy. So if you have any mental health condition that you're concerned about, anxiety, depression, please see a licensed therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist in your state who can help you with that. Life coaching, however, is something that works well with therapy, and it's something that can help you develop a plan of action, goals, things like that, have accountability, and achieve things in your life that you've always wanted to achieve. So life coaching has a place, but just know that it is not a replacement for therapy. Having said that, I'm available for life coaching. So if you want to learn more about that, please visit me at practicallysane.org. See you next time.